Over the years, many different organizations and just regular people have fought for the right to do many things. The right for women to vote, the right for black men and women to vote and not count as like a third of a person, the right for women to work, and the right for women to earn fair wages and equal, if not similar, to men, which in some ways are being still fought today. One thing I've always wondered, though, that I haven't really gotten the answer to until recently is how are special needs children treated before they had all the rights that they have today? The short answer is, well, not very good at all. Before the 1970s, special needs children were literally ignored and pushed aside by most, if not all, of society. In fact, when it came to earning an education, there wasn't really much of a choice for these special needs children and their families. They really had only three choices. 1, to get homeschooled. 2, to hire a private tutor. Or 3, go to private school. Well, you might be thinking, that's not that bad. 3 choices is better than 0 choices, right? Well, not exactly. Both hiring a private tutor and getting homeschooled required a commodity many people in those days, and arguably even in these days, were very short on, and that's money. As many hardworking people know, money is not easy to come across, and since 2 out of those 3 choices required you to have lots of money, well, almost every family without enough money to afford those services were fresh out of luck. So there's always homeschooling though, right? That can be possibly cheaper. Well, yes, but also you would have to find out how to teach your child these subjects, right? You'd have to learn these subjects yourself and learn how to teach them properly to your special needs child. Not to mention, they're called special needs children, right? So you have to learn how to provide for those special needs. And you had little to no support from really anybody in your family because nobody knew what they're doing. You're trying to figure out how to meet the needs of a child who has special needs, right? How would you end up doing that? You have no support structure, right? You have no one to ask for advice. You're all just kind of figuring it out. You're frustrated. You're probably not sleeping well, probably not eating well from the stress of having to most likely continue to work to provide for your family, right? And to keep yourselves afloat. And to somehow teach your child these subjects on your own and meet their special needs at the same time and managing all their behaviors that you know little to nothing about. Thankfully, many different people banded together and started fighting for the rights of these special needs students. A bunch of different advocacy groups, different grassroots campaigns and organizations started to rise up from the ashes and form organizations that grew over the years to fight for the students to be in the same schools as children without disabilities and have rights and services provided to them. The Congress at the time, the 94th Congress, stated that out of the 8 million children in the United States with special needs were not given enough educational support that would provide an equal opportunity for them to succeed. And later in 1990, the EHA was actually reauthorized, and in that process, it was also renamed to a law that many people are familiar with today, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA for short. But wait, there's more. Children and their families were also given the right to privacy when it came to the special needs child's data. So much like hospitals, right, are not allowed to disclose information about their patients due to the HIPAA law, children with disabilities were also given similar rights under a different law known as FERPA. FERPA stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And under this law, only the parents, the child itself, some school officials, some governmental authorities that were appropriate, and criminal investigations, amongst other very specific and very niche situations, this data of the child was not allowed to be distributed freely, publicly, to anyone except for these people. But what about public charter schools and private schools? Did they get the same rights and same services as these children in public schools? Well, for public charter schools, the short answer is yes. So they have the same exact rights as children who would attend a public school. For private schools, it was a bit different and a lot trickier. Special needs children that are enrolled by their parents into private schools don't automatically get the same rights as their peers would in a public school setting or a public charter. So how do these children get services or rights in these schools, these private schools? Well, something called a consultation has to happen. A consultation is basically a fancy word for a meeting between several important agencies and people. And these would include the local educational agency in that region or area, or even a state educational agency if that's applicable in certain situations, the private school officials, and representatives of the parents who obviously placed their child in that private school. Now, during this consultation, they all discuss what these child's needs are, what the child's disabilities are, and what kind of services will be provided for this child. They do have to come to a consensus on what those services and rights will be. So it's completely possible that the child will not receive any services, only some services, or maybe even a bunch of services. It really depends on a couple of factors. So one is the funding. So private schools are granted some federal funding. So at these consultations, a question that may come up is whether or not they can afford to provide the services that the child needs, right? So do they have enough money, in other words? And that's it. After many, many years of wondering what life was like for children with special needs before these modern laws were enacted, I've finally been able to answer that question. And I hope I've been able to enlighten your life a little bit more. We take many, many rights that we have today for granted here in the United States, especially since a lot of these events happened in a time far removed and far away from where we are today. But I think it's important to hang on to these lessons that we learned in the past, because if we don't learn from our history, then we are doomed to repeat it.